Good morning. So Jesus was the most famous rule breaker in all of history. He was. He broke a lot of rules, standing up for love, and he did it in a way that he didn't harm other people with his body. That's called nonviolence. And he was willing to get hurt to share that message with other people. The people who were in power in the time of Jesus were so afraid of the message that he was sharing that they killed him for it. And I once read in a book that if you want to figure out whether the teachings of a teacher are true or not, you don't look at the teachings. You look at that teacher's first students and how they lived their lives. So who were Jesus' first students? The disciples, right? So the disciples didn't stop what they were doing once Jesus was killed. The disciples still took Jesus' message and tried to share it with the whole world. They broke a lot of rules. They stood up for love. They did it in a way that they didn't harm other people with their bodies, and they were willing to get hurt in the process. All of the disciples, except for John, were killed because they were trying to share Jesus' message with the world. So, big deal. So if we were to make a list of all the rule breakers in history, that list would be really long. Would you be on that list?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be on that list. But if we shortened the list to only have people on the list who broke rules, but they broke rules while they were standing up for love, that list would get a lot shorter, right? And if we only put people on the list who were rule breakers, who were standing up for love, and they did it in a way that they didn't harm other people with their bodies, that list would get even shorter, right? So we only put people on that list who were rule breakers, who were standing up for love, who didn't harm other people with their bodies, and they were willing to get hurt, that list would be pretty short. Still plenty of people in history who did that, and a lot of people knew about Jesus. So last Monday, we celebrated the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was a preacher. He knew Jesus' way, right? The whole movement that Jesus started was called the Way. And that was the civil rights movement, and that movement was to change the laws that were hateful laws. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. knew that all people had equal value, and they were hateful laws. And in fact, what I didn't know was that kids had a big part to play in that movement. There was something called the Children's Crusade in Birmingham, Alabama. It was called the Children's March. And what happened was, Dr. King asked people to be willing to go to jail to spread the message of love. He wanted to fill up the jail so that everybody in the world would look at what was happening in Birmingham, Alabama. And no grown-ups stood up. No grown-ups were willing to march. Guess who stood up? All the kids. So there were thousands of people who marched in Birmingham, Alabama, thousands of children, and they were all arrested. 10 years old, 8 years old, 4 years old, 6 years old, all arrested, marching for love, doing it in a way that was nonviolent and being willing to get hurt. And some of those kids did get hurt, but guess what? Because they marched, they changed the rules in Birmingham, Alabama. And because they marched, the president, who was president at that time, John F. Kennedy, he worked to change the law about how we treat people. So, Christians are called to break rules that are hateful, to stand up for love in a way that doesn't harm other people, and we are called to be willing to get hurt to do that. And that was Jesus' message. That was Jesus' way. And we are all part of the way. So keep your eyes open. I'm sure during your lifetime you will be called to do something. And we'll see whether you answer that call. Let's pray. Gracious God, help us not to be believers. Help us to be doers. Help us to be willing to stand up against hateful rules. Stand in love in a way that we don't harm others. Help us to be willing to be hurt, to spread that message. Amen.